Many of us have endured toxic relationships at various points in our lives, leaving emotional scars in their wake. However, is it in accordance with biblical teachings to advocate for the idea that severing ties with a toxic partner, spouse, sibling, or parent is permissible? When I was born in 1978, my 7-year-old brother was convinced that I had come into this world with one sole intention: to steal our mother's affection away from him. Many years later, when he was an adult serving in the UN forces, he admitted that he found it difficult, if not impossible, to love me as a brother because I had stolen our mother's affection from him. Over the years, I have longed for a brother, but the few times we have had any contact, it has always ended with him belittling me, just like my father did. You might wonder why I never confronted him, but back then, I had a broken spirit from years of being told by my father that I would never amount to anything, that I was not worth anything, and so on. So, what my brother did was just a continuation of what our father had started, and I had no strength. Due to the circumstances that led to my decision to sever ties with my parents in 2010, I found myself in a position where I had also to cut off contact with my brother. This decision was tough for me, especially as someone deeply committed to the Christian faith. I have spent a significant amount of time reflecting on the teachings of the Bible concerning relationships with family members and have sought guidance on aligning my actions with my religious beliefs. I have been grappling with the question of whether it is morally acceptable to distance myself from toxic siblings and have been seeking ways to reconcile my faith with the challenging choices I've had to confront. In many discussions, I have delved into this particular issue with numerous Christian community members. They have all highlighted the absence of explicit scriptures in the New Testament directly addressing the permissibility or sinfulness of severing ties with toxic siblings. Yet, they have emphasized that their conviction, purportedly guided by the Spirit of God, leads them to believe that such actions are justified only as a last resort and exclusively in cases of a violent relationship, which was not the case here. Their rationale is deeply rooted in the belief that we are presently in the dispensation of grace, and consequently, even toxic siblings should be recipients of grace. When I have discussed this with individuals who do not identify as Christians, I have found that they tend to agree that it is often the most reasonable course of action to sever ties with toxic siblings. Their perspective is deeply rooted in the belief that we should prioritize protecting ourselves from abuse, even if it requires cutting off close family members. Do you observe the contrast between these two approaches? Perhaps you have encountered a comparable situation as a Christian, where other believers have emphasized the importance of forgiveness and the permissibility of severing relationships only in cases involving violence. Which of these approaches do you believe resonates more closely with the principles taught in the Bible and aligns with our understanding of God? The New Testament was assembled several centuries after Christ's death and resurrection. During this period, numerous letters and written teachings circulated among the early Christian congregations, serving as revered scriptures that guided Jesus' followers in adhering to God's instructions from the Old Testament. Many of these original writings have been lost, and those that were eventually included in the New Testament were often determined through contentious and sometimes violent debates, with influential bishops wielding significant power in the decision-making process. According to the Christians I've spoken with, there are no specific scriptures in the New Testament that directly discuss whether it is permissible or sinful to cut ties with toxic siblings. This may be because the New Testament, in its current form, did not exist during the time of Paul, the apostles, and Jesus. What would happen if we read the Bible that Jesus, Paul, and the apostles read? In the Old Testament, there are several instances where individuals sever ties with toxic family members. One notable example is the story of Abraham and Lot, where the Bible suggests that Abraham's blessings from God were hindered until he distanced himself from Lot. Paul's letters, upon which some Christians base their counsel regarding toxic relationships, were composed in an era when it was widely acknowledged and accepted that it might be necessary to cut ties with toxic family members, similar to the actions taken by Abraham in his dealings with Lot. Do you perceive the direction of this situation? I have found that the guidance offered to me by non-Christians is surprisingly more aligned with the teachings of the Bible compared to the advice given by Christians who solely focus on the New Testament and disregard the historical context of how the Bible was assembled. If we read the Bible as if it were written to us and make the common assumption that we as Christians only have to relate to the New Testament, even though the New Testament as we know it today did not exist until several hundred years after the resurrection of Christ, a Christian who is in a toxic relationship is duty-bound to try everything to make that relationship function, and severing ties is the ultimate last resort. If we read the Bible as if it were written for us but not to us, we have to take into consideration Paul's Bible, the Old Testament. Then, we quickly understand that our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus, actually wants us to cut ties with toxic people to protect ourselves. Sometimes, he withholds his answers to prayers and blessings because we refuse to leave the toxic relationship. I don't know about you, but I am thankful the Bible is not written to us, but for us, because then I don't have to suffer in a toxic relationship.